Donald Trump imposes 50% tariffs on selected Canadian products. Mark Carney says that they're illegal and vows to fight back. And Poliever says Mark Carney is failing us and making Canadians poorer. Three different narratives applied to the same set of events. We're watching three games be played on the same playing board. The Red Ensign Special starts now.
May the Lord show his mercy upon you. May the light of his presence be your guide. May he guide you and uphold you. May his spirit be ever by your side.
Years that lie ahead will be a challenge to all of us. It will be a challenge to our skill, it will be a challenge to our ingenuity, and it will be a great challenge to our ability to provide the economic atmosphere to encourage the industry, which is so much a part of our economy and which will be so important if we are to continue in the vanguard of Canada.
We focused watching taxpayers' money, and we're going to put an end to the gravy train.
Cooperation must take precedence over competition. People before profits.
Smell it. What is that?
It smells like money.
You like that smell?
I love that smell. I wouldn't be here if I didn't.
All right. Well, it's been 6 months, maybe more than that, maybe a year of this story back and forth, and here we are again. As the trade negotiations regarding the Canada-US-Mexico agreement begin to pick up steam again, Donald Trump has threatened to impose in 30 days 50% tariffs on selected Canadian products. These tariffs will be imposed under a novel legal theory, arguing that the treatment of selected American products in Canada is palpably unfair and that therefore the executive branch has a duty to respond. This is the first time that this legal theory has been employed by a U.S. president in order to impose tariffs. We're going to see it tested at probably at the Supreme Court in relatively short order. But it's worth noting that, particularly with regard to alcoholic beverages, there is a pretty reasonable case that the Canadian government has in fact treated U.S. products unfairly. Particularly Doug Ford, but also other Canadian premiers have used the monopsony power of the liquor control boards in order to privilege the purchasing of products from jurisdictions other than the United States. So it's quite reasonable to think that the legal theory at least has a kind of basic level of merit to it. Before we get into the way that this event has been framed by the Trump administration, the Carney government, and Peirre in opposition, I want to come back to the actual situation, the fundamental dynamics between the two parties. Canada and the United States have a very asymmetric trading relationship, a trading relationship that has a substantial net surplus for Canada right at the moment, but a net surplus that is defined by certain products. Canada has a huge trade surplus with the United States in oil and gas related products, as well as certain other critical minerals, and a huge trade deficit in manufactured goods and various services. And if we look at the actual announcement, the set of tariffs that are being considered explicitly exclude energy, potash, critical minerals, and fish. So if you look at only the set of products that the US government is seeking to make in scope for tariffs, in a reciprocal contest of tariffs, a traditional trade war, Canada is at a very substantial advantage because Canada runs a huge trade deficit with the United States in these product categories. So if you see reciprocal tariffs of comparable levels on the product categories in question, the tariffs collected by the Canadian government will be much larger than the tariffs collected by the US government. The Carney government has observed this and I think it's one of the reasons why the Carney government has been pretty free with its efforts to respond reciprocally to this point. It's also worth noting that if we look at the transportation geography of North America, alternative markets, alternative routing for goods is a very unlikely eventuality of these tariffs. You have two huge physical barriers on the Canadian side of the border, the Canadian Rockies and the country on the north side of Lake Superior and Georgian Bay, both of which are not impassable, but are pretty extreme cost barriers to transportation. Whether it's trucking, whether it's rail transport, whether it's pipelines, it is much more expensive to route traffic east-west across either of these two barriers than it is to route traffic north-south through the United States. In fact, a substantial majority of the trade between Western Canada and the Toronto-Montreal corridor actually runs south of the Great Lakes through Chicago, even if the final destination doesn't ultimately cross a border. This was a fact noted when there was a fight with the Michigan government over Enbridge Line 9, which runs south of the Great Lakes in order to deliver natural gas to the GTA. And it runs south of the Great Lakes for reasons which are very obvious to anyone who's ever driven north of the Great Lakes between central Canada and Winnipeg. The country there is some of the most difficult country to negotiate anywhere on the planet. A fact which might be remembered by those who critique Canadian forestry policy as it has evolved through the wildfires. So it's very likely that whatever the tariffs are between Canada and the United States, they will be paid by both sides. And so in this reciprocal game, because there are no alternative markets for the product, and there's very limited alternative routing, certainly no alternative routing or alternative markets that are accessible in the kind of time horizons we're talking about. The Mark Carney government continues its strategy of appealing to alternative centers of sovereignty within the United States. The Prime Minister released a statement indicating that the tariffs the Trump administration is seeking to impose are a violation of CUSMA, looking pretty explicitly for American courts to restrain the president in this action. A strategy which is not unreasonable, especially since the courts have a long history of staying executive actions while the courts go through their process. Mark Carney correctly assesses that he has a long political mandate within Canada in order to pursue his strategy, and Donald Trump is an 80-year-old man with 3 years left in a term and 1 year left before he very likely loses the House and Senate and becomes a somewhat isolated force in American politics. And so he's executing a strategy intended to run out the clock on the American president and intended to appeal to other centers of sovereignty within the U.S. government. Now, it's worth taking a minute here to listen to Donald Trump's comments with regard to these tariffs. I ordinarily don't listen to him directly, but this is instructive. So let's give it a listen here.
Tariffs last night, the Canada tariffs. One, are those a response to the wildfires in Canada?
No. That's separate. We're looking at that separately.
And what is there anything Canada
It's only
can do?
response to the way they've treated our farmers and our people. Yeah, Canada's been very, very tough on us over the years, for many years, and no other president's done anything about it. I love Canada. I love the people of Canada. Many friends that live in Canada, but their leadership, from Trudeau to the current leadership, I mean, in all fairness to them, they need us to survive. Without us, there's no way they can survive. So, but they've been very, very tough over a period of the last 50 years, actually.
That comment in the last third of the statement, without us, they can't survive. This is really the crux of the strategy being pursued by the Trump administration. There's a propaganda element there where whether it's the wildfires or whether it's the idea that Canada has been palpably unfair to American farmers and American manufacturing industries, a couple of ideas that are frankly pretty ridiculous, but normal for trade negotiations between two parties. It's really the last statement. Even though in the trade relationship between Canada and the United States, Canada can, in absolute terms, probably impose more cost through reciprocal tariffs than the United States can. Donald Trump is looking at the fact that the United States is an economy that is more than 10 times the size of Canada's, and the trade in goods between the two countries is more dispensable to American industry than the other way around, and he is making the presumption that the United States is more able to endure the pain of a trade conflict between the two nations than Canada is, and so he thinks that if he escalates, the Carney administration will come under intolerable pressure and be forced to make a deal which is favorable to the United States. This is one game that's being played, in contrast to the game Carney is playing, in which he holds the position that attacks from the Trump administration reinforce his political position within Canada, propping up his government, making him stronger, and so more able to endure the pressure related to a trade war. But second, that Carney believes he doesn't have to outlast the United States in a trade conflict. He only has to outlast President Trump. And so whether it's by appealing to other centers of sovereignty like the courts in the United States, whether it's other delaying tactics, whether it's appealing to the political opposition that exists in the United States to Donald Trump, this is a strategy to isolate the problem to one person, one man, and then wait him out, knowing that he has a finite window of opportunity in which to execute his strategy. So we have a completely asymmetric game being played between the two negotiating partners in this agreement. And it must be said, this is a game which is very familiar. Repeatedly through Trump's administration, he has been convinced by members of his administration, members of his kind of media cohort, that the United States is in a stronger position to leverage a situation than it actually is in. And so he has escalated only to find that the advisors who drove him into executing a strategy overstated the position of the United States, and he now finds himself in a position where it is humiliating. It is humiliating and a significant loss to de-escalate, but in which time is on the side of his adversary, especially given the relatively short window that Donald Trump has to execute his domestic agenda. My favorite new example of this is the tariffs which the Trump administration has set down for the generic pharmaceutical industry, presumably which have been negotiated over a period of time. The formula exempts generic pharmaceuticals from tariffs for a 2-year period between 2026 and 2028, after which there's an escalating tariff, first to 100%, then to 200% for every year thereafter. Now, the generic pharmaceutical executives who have negotiated this arrangement are betting that they can give the Trump administration a propaganda win to announce this framework, and that Donald Trump and MAGA more generally will be politically impotent by the time 2028 comes around, and the framework for escalating tariffs will never actually be implemented, and therefore they will never actually have to do anything. You see these asymmetric games being played around the president all over when you start looking for them. And it is a very interesting question to ask of the people around the Trump administration what they expect to be getting out of it. And their response, it's a very interesting question. To me, what this looks like is an empire in decay, and a central figure at the heart of the administration who has a very limited window of opportunity, who is wasting it by being deceived. Now, it's worth noting the third frame which is being applied to this particular event, again, completely orthogonal to the strategies of the two negotiating the actual agreement between the two parties. This is coming from Peirre and the Conservative Party of Canada. Let's take a listen here.
We should be the richest country in the world right now. By far, we have the fourth most farmland per capita. We have about the fifth or sixth most natural gas, the fourth most oil, the third most uranium, the most potash, the biggest oceanic coastline. Like, we should be by far the richest country anywhere on Earth. You know, if your goal is to get back at President Trump, well, the way to do it is by unlocking our own economy so that we can compete with our American friends and compete with the rest of the world, rather than just, political theater.
So there is Mr. Poliever attempting once again to leverage the trade situation between Canada and the United States in order to get his coveted cost of living election, right? We should be the richest country on earth. What does he mean by that? He means that Canadians are getting poorer, and I want to fight an election on the basis of the Liberal Party's record of consistently making Canadians poorer, and I want to be the party of making Canadians richer rather than poorer. This is a really effective political frame if Peirre Poliever can manage to wrangle the propaganda environment onto this turf, though I highly doubt he will be successful in wrangling the political dialectic onto this turf, because on this turf he can align the interests of the Alberta elite, to which he is inextricably tied, who would like to see economic development, particularly in the west of the country, and the kind of middle-class voter who is ethnically diverse but subject to economic degradation in the areas around Toronto and Montreal, right? By making the election about the declining standards of living for the overwhelming majority of the non-dependent people within Canada, he can fight an election where he has a propaganda advantage. This is the strategy of Peirre Poliever. And if he had more media assets at his disposal, he might be able to win with this strategy. Certainly, if he could fight an election where the dominant narrative is the question of have Canadians gotten poorer over the past 15 years of Liberal governance, that's an election he could win. But again, it represents no strategy at all in dealing with the actual negotiation between Canada and the United States. It's a view from nowhere strategy. It's not an actual credible alternative for the use of sovereignty from the point of view of somebody running the government of Canada. If you imagine yourself in the position of running the federal government of Canada, you're going to be faced with the shakedown tactics of the Trump administration and the very short-term thinking associated with that. And you're going to have very limited options at your disposal. There are some things that Poliever could probably do in order to make Canada richer right away, but most of them have nothing to do with the trade conflict between Canada and the United States. Most of them have everything to do with reversing green policy, an approach that Carney has been effective in speaking about, but has not been very effective at actually acting on, right? Under Carney, there has been some reversal of green policy and the native veto on resource development projects, but it has been slow and it has been very limited. And so you can see how in this frame, Peirre Poliever is not only sort of politically happy, but he also can kind of focus the policy discussion on things he could actually do as prime minister. All right, well, we have one constellation of facts. We have three completely different frames associated with three completely different strategies for the future. I did this exercise to understand the kind of both the propaganda position of each of the three members, the actual strategy for policy of each of the three participants, and to remind everyone that one of the weird effects of broadcast-only media, rather than putting these people in a room together where they have to actually have dialogue, is that the facts can be presented exclusively from their own frame at all times. This is one of the defining skills that makes politicians effective in the modern world, being able to inhabit only their own frame, which is great from the point of view of maximizing your effectiveness in a popular sovereignty world, but it is actually extremely negative in terms of the outcomes that it produces for governance. It would actually be better for everyone involved to de-escalate this trade conflict, to negotiate through some of these difficult issues and come to a reasonable solution, at least in the relatively short term, given that the trade infrastructure of both countries is set up, predicated on this strategy, a strategy which has been pursued by both nations for the last 50 years. But there's nothing that anybody can do, involved in politics or otherwise, to bring the discussion into that frame. And so the incentives of power and the incentives of the declining American empire kind of lock in this difficult position, and it's likely to remain difficult until that system of incentives can be changed by fundamental political change on one or both sides of the border. Thank you for your time and attention. I hope you learned something.
Canada originally was put together by two groups of people who didn't have much in common but didn't want to be American.
The line just popped into my head. A bunch of the boys was a-whooping it up. And there I got my start.
We have had a flag. Flags can be changed. But flags cannot be imposed, the sacred symbols of a people's hopes and aspirations, by the simple, capricious, personal choice of a Prime Minister of Canada.
I have watched this country for half of my life from abroad, and we have turned complacency into just that, a national sport.
I am resolutely opposed to all innovation, all change, but I am determined to understand what's happening. I don't choose just to sit and let the juggernaut roll over me.